Welcome back to the deep dive. Find your most comfortable seat, maybe get that second cup of coffee or glass of water, whatever helps you chill out, because we are about to plunge headfirst into the very inner mechanics of existence. This is one of those topics that sounds intensely philosophical.
Okay.
But we promise the implications are immediately practical and, frankly, pretty mind-bending.
Today's deep dive is not about what you believe. It's really about what you build.
What you build, I like that.
We are pulling back the curtain on the invisible blueprints that govern your physical life, exploring this radical idea that your thoughts, your emotions, your intentions, they aren't just these fleeting brain processes.
Oh, right. Not just puffs of smoke.
Not at all. They possess shape, color, and an undeniable solidity. They are the chief architects of the world you perceive, right down to the traffic you hit this morning.
Or the book you're reading right now.
Exactly.
That's right. So our mission today, and this is really for you, the learner, is to quickly grasp these core Seth concepts of psychological structures, psychological solidities. We need to map out how they function as these, unseen templates for physical reality.
And this is the crucial part, how they can, often by accident, construct truly destructive forms. Things like entrenched fear and hatred.
And we're going to be your guides through this because it can get dense. We're going to unpack it with hopefully just enough humor to keep us all hooked.
And to do this, we're going straight to the source, the heart of the original material.
Where are we going today?
This entire deep dive is anchored in session 75 of the Early Sessions Book 2 of the Seth material.
Okay.
It was recorded on a Wednesday, July 29th, 1964 at 9 p.m. This is raw, foundational stuff.
And before we get into the cosmic geometry, I love grounding this in its very human context. If you look at the session notes, you get this picture of, intense intellectual work mixed with just pure domestic reality. The medium, Jane Roberts, felt quite tired.
Yeah, she needed coffee to help pep her up.
Exactly. And meanwhile, the scribe, Robert Butts, was clearly still reeling from the session before this one.
Yes, Seth even noted, humorously, that it had hit him in the solar plexus, so to speak.
I mean, you have these two people channeling and transcribing radical, reality-altering information.
And they're doing it while dealing with fatigue and headaches and making sure the family dog, Willie, is just, comfortably napping in his chair.
It's the perfect snapshot, isn't it? Universe-shattering truth is being revealed, but it's still July 29th, 1964, and the coffee needs to be strong.
It makes the whole thing so quirky and relatable.
It really does. So with that vibe set, relaxed, inquisitive, but ready for some pretty intense material, what is the precise mission for the learner today?
Our core mission is to grasp Seth's radical redefinition of form and matter, and to establish the subconscious mind's role as the chief architect of everything we call reality.
So I have to move past this idea of reality being out there.
Right, and understand it as a continuous, faithful projection of in here.
Which brings us to the big fundamental paradox we have to wrestle with. If my inner thoughts truly possess shape, color, and solidity, if I am the master builder, how does my mind keep accidentally constructing things I fundamentally don't want?
Right. Why is my internal architect prone to such catastrophic, habitual blunders?
Exactly.
And that precisely is why we have to map the territory of this psychological structure first. Before we can even identify where the errors are being introduced, it's like debugging the blueprints.
Oh, excellent. Now, before we jump into the first major section, we do want to make a quick declaration.
Yes.
This deep dive, based on the Seth material, will be distributed free of charge on all major platforms for purely educational purposes.
We really believe that knowledge concerning the fundamental mechanics of consciousness should be widely and freely accessible.
Okay, let's unpack this foundational concept then. We start where science usually begins, right? With the physical world. If I look at a house, the standard assumption is that the matter, the wood, the bricks, it exists, and the form, the shape of the walls, the pitch of the roof, that's just a characteristic of the matter.
And Seth immediately says, nope, that's backward.
He just flips the whole hierarchy.
He flips it completely.
Yeah.
The fundamental radical insight is that form is not a characteristic of matter, but a characteristic of consciousness.
That is crucial.
It is. Matter in this framework is the raw material. It's the potential. But consciousness is the power source and the structural designer.
So consciousness conceives the structure, and only then does matter rush in to fill that structure to make it perceivable on our plane.
Exactly. The form we see, a house, a tree, your own hand, it's always composed of matter, of course.
Yeah.
But the idea, the template, the blueprint that pre-exists the physical thing, the idea is primary.
And this template isn't just a vague thought, is it? Or an abstract feeling?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Seth states there are specific, measurable psychological forms or structures that act as the unseen frameworks underlying every single physical form.
So they're not just random mental static.
They are unified patterns, gestalts,
Yeah.
that exist in psychological perspectives that our outer senses just cannot detect.
Gestalts. Right, patterns that are greater than the sum of their parts. So we're not talking about a thought about a brick.
No.
We're talking about the complete, functional, energetic pattern of a brick existing in a non-physical way.
Exactly. And to describe where these patterns exist, Seth basically had to invent new vocabulary.
Because physical language is just too limited.
Right, it's all about space-time dimensions. So he discusses depths that have nothing to do with space as you conceive space to be. And this is a key technical point that listeners might remember from earlier sessions, like session 59.
Okay, help me ground that. Because depth that has nothing to do with space.
Now, that sounds really abstract. I mean, if I think of depth, I imagine going deeper into the ocean or farther into space.
Sure, that's natural. But think of it as depth of quality or depth of meaning, not depth of distance.
Okay. Imagine the difference between seeing the word apple on a page and then actually experiencing the taste, the scent, the weight, the memory, the emotional resonance of biting into a perfect apple.
Ah, okay, I see.
That second experience has infinitely more quality and depth than the flat image of the word.
Yeah,
Right? Psychological solidities exist in that depth of quality, not in, feet or meters.
That's a much more concrete analogy. And Seth doubles down on this non-spatial tangibility by introducing psychological solidities. So a concept can be solid even if I can't trip over it.
Precisely. If something is stubborn or fundamental or so internally cohesive that it resists change, Seth defines it as having psychological solidity. It has mass, but only in the realm of psychological perspective.
An integral, self-contained unit of consciousness.
That's it. And every consciousness, therefore, possesses a temporary material structure, your body, and an eternal psychological structure that resides in this deep, non-spatial solidity.
And this psychological structure is critical. This is where Seth locates the true self, the entity. The entity being that greater organizing intelligence of which our current personality is just one highly focused manifestation.
That's the hierarchy. The entity is found within this psychological structure. It's the constant, the whole. And this larger consciousness, the entity, is constantly working. It's actively creating the various perspectives in which it can then manifest itself in form.
It's an endless exploration of potential.
It is.
It sounds kind of exhausting, frankly, all this creation and form projection.
Well, it demands intense focus. Seth clarifies that consciousness adopts many forms and many different perspectives, but because of the intense focus necessary for form projection, for being you, sitting here, listening,
Right.
the individual consciousness can often become unaware of the divisions or various manifestations of itself. We narrow our focus so intensely on this one physical reality that we lose sight of the grander architectural plans being executed elsewhere.
We're so busy admiring the house we're living in that we forget we designed and built the entire neighborhood.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Now, bringing this back to our lived physical experience. If these psychological structures have depth and solidity, where is the most common place we actually feel them? Where do they become physically apparent?
They show up most immediately and recognizably in our emotions.
Okay.
This is where the metaphysical geometry really hits home. We often treat emotions like wisps of air, just ephemeral reactions. But Seth states emphatically that emotions are, in fact, psychological solidities.
Well, I need to zoom in on this because this is a truly surprising fact. My sadness isn't just some chemical cocktail in my brain. It has a physical structure in psychological reality.
Absolutely. Seth states that emotions do have definite form, certain mass, depth, and solidity in the realm of psychological perspective.
Wow.
He goes on saying, in their own way, they have what amounts to shape, color, and structure. Just think of that. Your joy might be a bright, crystalline sphere. Your resentment might be a dense, murky, asymmetrical blob.
Okay, help me visualize this with a challenge. If I'm experiencing, say, chronic low-level anxiety, what determines its psychological shape? Is it a quick, jagged thing or a slow, heavy one?
It would depend entirely on the quality and the function of that anxiety, because we're dealing with quality depth, not physical space. The shape reflects the purpose or the cohesion of the construct.
Okay.
That anxiety might be a highly cohesive, repetitive pattern, let's say a psychological Mobius strip that just keeps feeding into itself.
Yeah.
And that self-contained pattern is what grants it solidity. It resists being dissolved because its internal structure is so stubbornly consistent.
That is a far cry from just a bad feeling. This means the inner self isn't passively receiving feelings.
No.
It is actively grappling with, manipulating, and juggling these inner psychological shapes before they are projected outward as the physical environment.
Exactly. The construction process begins internally. If you want a specific outcome in the physical world, a successful career, a loving relationship, even a simple piece of furniture, you must first successfully perceive, manipulate, and form the psychological gestalt that corresponds to that outcome.
So our physical universe's basic shapes are fundamentally just reflections of these inner patterns.
Reproduced in matter based on the skill of consciousness involved.
So the table I'm using right now isn't just a table. It's the material symbol of a series of successful psychological constructions. Straight lines, angles, stability, utility.
All of which were manipulated and shaped in psychological solidities first. And that stability and utility is what makes the psychological structure behind the table a cohesive, solid pattern. That's the key takeaway from this first part. These inner psychological shapes exist as tangible prerequisites, just waiting to be assembled into physical form.
Okay, so we've established that our physical world is essentially a faithful material reproduction of an inner psychological structure. But if there's only one inner blueprint, how can it show up in a million different physical objects? What is the relationship between that inner idea and the outer object?
This moves us into the mechanism of projection. Physical structures, no matter how different they seem, are ultimately symbols of the psychological structures.
Symbols.
The inner structure will be projected faithfully across many different physical fields. They'll differ wildly in appearance, in material composition, but they will always adhere to that internal pattern.
It's like having one digital file that you can print on paper.
Yeah.
Or carve in marble, or play as a sound wave. The content is the same, but the medium and the surface appearance change dramatically.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And Seth gives us this wonderfully detailed example, the triangle analogy, to make this concept really tangible.
Right.
Imagine a particular idea, a concept, a psychological gestalt, that has the inherent internal psychological structure of a triangle. This is the blueprint we're working with.
So it's not the abstract concept of geometry from math class, but an active, energetic idea whose structural integrity is triangular.
Yes, that's its nature. So how does consciousness, using this single blueprint, create such diverse physical reality?
Where do we see it show up?
We can trace this triangular structure across two major fields, man-made creations and natural phenomena. Take architecture, for example. The triangular blueprint might manifest as the exact stress ratios used in a geodesic dome,
Okay.
or the specific A-frame design of a cabin, or even the subtle way a landscape architect structures three distinct zones in a park to guide your eye.
Or an abstract thought, like you said, a philosophical dissertation. How does that work?
Well, the triangular psychological structure demands a kind of three-part harmony or balance. So the dissertation might be structured around a perfect thesis, antithesis, synthesis progression.
Ah, of course.
The argument itself, the flow of the logic, would follow a distinct three-point pattern. That's what it gives the written work its cohesion, its intellectual solidity. The abstract argument has taken the triangle shape.
And what about the arts? You mentioned painting and sculpture.
In painting, it could manifest as a pyramidal composition. Think of Renaissance works like Leonardo's The Virgin of the Rocks. The figures are perfectly arranged into a triangular form, which lends it visual stability and psychological power.
And in sculpture.
In sculpture, the inner triangle dictates the three primary angles or points of balance needed for the piece to stand and convey tension or stability. The artist, often completely unconsciously, is manipulating that inner triangular gestalt and reproducing it materially.
And music. How does the triangle become sound?
It manifests as structure and rhythm. It might be a classic three-part musical form like ABA or ternary form, where the pattern dictates the return to the original theme.
Right.
Or, even more simply, it might dictate the use of a triad chord, three fundamental notes sounded together, which is the basis for pretty much all Western harmony. The structure of the sound itself is dictated by that pattern.
That covers the intentional man-made stuff. But what about the natural world? The same psychological structure has to be at play, but there's no human artist consciously driving the design.
This is where we see the consciousness of nature at work. The exact same inner triangle might manifest as the shape of a piece of granite.
How so?
The specific angle of a cleavage plane, for instance, resulting from immense pressure. Or look at shadows. At a particular moment, the light source, the object, and the ground will create a perfectly triangular shadow.
And that shadow is a temporary physical structure that's still obeying the inner blueprint.
Yes, because the shadow exists in relation to the matter and the light, both of which are also manifestations of consciousness. We also see it in the portion of a crystal's lattice structure.
Ah.
Crystals are highly ordered material forms, and their geometries, their repeating patterns, are direct reproductions of basic psychological structures. Often simple stable forms like cubes or triangles.
And even a tree branch. How does the structure of a tree branch follow this pattern?
It could be the precise way a particular species of tree branches out, creating three major limbs that support the canopy in a specific balanced relationship.
Or on a smaller level.
Or it could be the very angles at which the cells of the wood fibers align themselves to provide maximum strength against gravity and wind stress, again, following that inherent pattern of stability provided by the triangle.
So the common denominator is clear. In all of these cases, whether it's the human architect or the tree growing on its own, we have a material structure created by consciousness. And Seth clarifies that what we sometimes call dead matter is just other forms of consciousness.
And the success of the material creation, the quality of it, hinges entirely on that consciousness's ability to perceive, manipulate, and construct the inner psychological structure. It's all about the skill of the manipulation.
This amazing variety, though, it raises a big question about uniformity. If the inner possibilities, the variety of psychological structures are endless, why does matter exhibit certain similarities?
Right. Why don't we see objects that defy gravity or geometry every morning? Where's the limiting factor? Seth addresses this explicitly. He confirms that there is no limitation on the variety of inner psychological structure per se. The potential blueprints are infinite. The cosmic toolbox is just overflowing.
But the constraint is on the user.
Exactly. The limitation lies in the current development of individual consciousness. As he puts it, due to this development, only a small portion of theoretically possible psychological structures can be utilized at any given point.
We're like psychological apprentices, still mastering the basic tools.
That's a perfect way to think about it.
So the reason physical laws and physical forms appear consistent to us is because we, collectively, are consistently using the same limited subset of available blueprints. We haven't mastered the psychological manipulations necessary to construct forms we haven't even dreamed of yet.
That's the implication. This limited usage is why matter exhibits certain similarities, and it's why there are many forms presently unknown to us. If individual consciousnesses were capable of constructing those more complex, unknown psychological structures first, matter would appear in forms you don't currently recognize.
But the structure has to be skillfully built internally before it can be constructed materially.
We are bottlenecked by our own current psychological development.
This concept of skillful internal construction is critical. If we are constantly perceiving, manipulating, and forming these psychological structures, where inside of us is this immense architectural work actually taking place, where's the construction site?
Seth locates this process, the manipulation and forming of structures, in what we commonly call the subconscious.
And here we have to immediately redefine terms, as Seth always does.
Always.
We tend to view the subconscious as this, dark, murky, irrational cellar of the mind.
He corrects this immediately. There is no real division between consciousness and subconsciousness. They aren't separate entities. They're just two different, equally conscious parts of the whole self.
Okay.
The subconscious is simply operating within a very valid psychological perspective, one that the conscious self typically ignores because it's so focused on immediate physical data.
So the subconscious isn't less conscious, it's just focused on the internal construction process, using those psychological solidities,
Right.
while the conscious self is focused on the material results of that construction.
Precisely. And the hierarchy is set. Before any successful physical structure can be manifested, whether it's a house or a healthy body, the psychological perception, manipulation, and construction of inner data must be performed.
And this inner manipulation is, in Seth's words, extremely important.
Because it determines the quality of the final physical product.
This brings us to the most practical and maybe the most painful section of this deep dive, errors. If we are, at our core, this magnificent entity, and the basic structures are inherently creative, why do we manifest massive amounts of suffering? How does the entity's construction site repeatedly churn out conflict, fear, and misery?
To understand that, we need to differentiate between the fundamental blueprints and the derived, faulty constructions we build from them. We start with a basic foundational psychological structure that is inherently positive: consciousness survival.
That makes sense. The self is an eternal entity, so its primary basic structure must be the perpetual knowledge and impulse toward its own survival.
Yes, that basic structure of consciousness survival must then be translated, interpreted, and projected into our physical field as physical survival. The error, the creation of destructive forms, occurs due to inadequate perception, manipulation, or construction of that core impulse.
The interpretation is faulty.
Exactly.
So we take the inner truth of eternal boundless existence, consciousness survival, and we incorrectly filter it through the physical focus, distorting it into the idea of physical survival at any and all costs with intense vulnerability.
That distortion is the very mechanism for generating fear. Seth reveals that the inadequate perception of consciousness survival leads directly to the psychological creation of fear.
And here's the profound point, isn't it?
It is. Fear is not a basic psychological structure. It is a derived construct.
Wow, so fear is not an existential given. It's a faulty piece of architecture, an error in translation.
And it gets worse. Hatred is also not a basic structure. It is the result of a further psychological manipulation of fear.
So it's a step removed even from the first error.
Yes. Fear is internal. Hatred is often fear projected outward, crystallized into aggressive, defensive, or offensive psychological forms aimed at an external target. It is fear weaponized and solidified.
That's a fundamentally different worldview. It means we aren't born with these problems. We build them out of misinterpreted positive raw materials. And what happens when the individual constructs these errors, this fearful, hateful geometry in the subconscious?
Like any other psychological gestalt, the individual then constructs fear and hatred into definite physical form.
Which manifests as what?
Destructive relationships, chronic anxiety that alters your brain chemistry, specific dangerous physical situations, self-sabotage, or even the material reality of weapons and conflict on a mass scale.
And now we get to the vicious circle, the terrifying feedback loop that keeps so many people stuck.
Precisely. Once the error is constructed physically, the outer senses perceive this newly constructed physical threat. For example, the fearful person sees conflict constantly because they built it.
Right.
That physical perception, experienced through the body, influences the inner self, which reinforces the original inadequate perception of consciousness survival.
So the physical manifestation validates the original error.
It confirms the inadequate perception.
Yeah.
So the individual, feeling more threatened, attempts to combat the physical threats by forming further, more threatening physical constructions in a defensive or offensive maneuver. They build bigger walls or bigger weapons.
It's the ultimate self-fulfilling prophecy of catastrophic design. They built the threat, they see the threat, and seeing the threat convinces them to reinforce the underlying blueprint for the threat.
It's a perpetual engine of suffering, and the loop accelerates. The greater the number of such destructive physical constructions, the greater the individual's expectation of further fear and danger.
And the problem, as Seth reiterates, starts not with outside circumstances,
but with the inability to perceive the correct inner data, the fundamental truth of the entity's perpetual survival.
And just like any faulty architecture, these errors don't remain as isolated incidents. They become ingrained, they spread, they become habitual errors.
Coloring all other psychological structures the individual attempts to form.
How do these ingrained structural flaws get passed down through families or cultures?
This brings in the mechanism of telepathy. Communication in the psychological perspective is almost exclusively telepathic.
Okay.
Since children operate so intensely in the psychological perspective before their physical senses are fully developed, they pick up habitual errors early, directly from their parents.
Wait, so this is not just modeling behavior like, Mom is afraid of the dark, so I learned to be afraid. This is literally receiving a flawed blueprint telepathically.
It's the transfer of a psychological structure. Seth explicitly notes that in the beginning, children actually begin their physical construction along lines telepathically received from their parents, even while they're learning their own manipulation skills.
They inherit the faulty structure for interpreting consciousness survival before they even have a chance to build their own.
Yes.
That is a staggering concept, and it makes perfect sense for explaining generational patterns. You're not just learning a specific fear, you are receiving the structural flaw in how to interpret reality itself.
And that powerful role of expectation is entirely dependent on those received or constructed errors. If the inner self expects perpetual danger, the physical environment will be constructed to faithfully deliver that danger.
So this detailed exploration of error, it was absolutely necessary.
It was,
Yeah.
because it empowers the learner. It shows that the problem is not external, unavoidable evil, but an internal, fixable flaw in perception and construction.
So we've established that we're constantly building, often with these inherited faulty blueprints, and that we are surrounded by the material symbols of these inner structures. Now let's pivot to the environment we perceive. I look around my room right now, and it seems so solid, fixed, and objectively there.
This is where Seth shifts the focus from the act of building to the experience of the built world. He confirms that the basic psychological structures, the positive fundamental templates, are crucial, and he promises to outline them in a following session.
Right, he says, knowledge of them will let you know what you have to work with.
Exactly. But first, we have to redefine the environment.
Because the physical environment is not a fixed external stage set.
It's entirely dynamic. The quality we call environment is actually many things in many places, with you at the focal point.
It's a relational concept, not a static object.
Yes. If you change your location, the environment instantly changes. If your emotional state changes, your perception of that environment shifts.
That's the core realization. The environment isn't a fixed external thing. It is a relationship within a personal perspective.
Exactly. You are the locus point, the observer, the filter, and the builder.
Yeah.
But this raises a fascinating paradox that the learner has to address.
Which is,
if the environment is constantly shifting relative to my perspective, where does that overwhelming feeling of consistency originate? Why does my life, year after year, seem to follow certain predictable patterns?
right. I know people who always, without fail, manage to find some small, irritating bureaucratic hurdle in their lives no matter how smoothly things seem to be going. Or the person who is always surrounded by books, even if they move cities every 2 years. The specific books change, but the pattern of being surrounded by intellectual pursuits persists.
That persistent pattern, that sense of continuity in your environment, is the direct result of the individual's characteristic way of constructing basic psychological structures into physical structures. It's your unique architectural signature.
So the consistency isn't in the external objects themselves, it's in the consistency of the builder.
That's it.
I have a habitual characteristic way of applying those fundamental blueprints. So say I habitually construct all my relationships with a slightly triangular, unstable structure that requires 3 people for balance.
Then no matter who you meet, that inner pattern dictates the outer structure of the relationship. Precisely. The structures themselves have depth, mass, solidity. They can be formed into numberless gestalt patterns. The variations are truly endless.
But because I rely on a limited set of psychological manipulation skills, my environment reflects that limited characteristic pattern.
You are reproducing your own signature consistency.
This realization is tremendously empowering because it ties back directly to that vicious circle of fear we talked about.
It does.
If I realize my environment's consistency is just a reflection of my inner habits, I can change the habit.
And that's the final actionable nugget for you, the learner. Seth emphasizes that there is nothing forcing the individual to form psychological gestalts of hate and fear from the basic positive structure of consciousness survival. The variations of construction are endless. The habitual errors are not destiny.
So the solution isn't some massive traumatic life overhaul.
No.
It's a precise, focused effort on correcting the faulty blueprint.
A targeted debug. If the problem is an inability to perceive the correct inner data, if you're misinterpreting survival as vulnerability, then changing that perception is the key.
And what does he suggest?
Seth suggests that a resetting right in one small area of psychological perspective can result in a beneficial turnabout in the manipulation of other, seemingly unrelated, basic structures.
That is the efficiency of the psychological perspective at work. You fix the triangular fear structure in relation to, say, your personal finances, and that successful manipulation skill immediately benefits your ability to construct structures related to your relationships or your health.
Because the underlying mechanism, the psychological architect's skill, has improved across the board. The positive structural correction just cascades throughout your constructed reality.
It's proof that you are not trapped by the errors you have constructed or inherited. The power to reconstruct is constant and available in every moment.
That's the takeaway.
This deep dive has fundamentally redefined our understanding of reality. We moved past the idea of passive matter, asserted that form belongs to the active process of consciousness.
And we explored the tangible reality of psychological solidities, the inner gestalts that possess definite shape, color, and structure.
We detailed the universal application of these blueprints, using the triangle analogy, seeing one single inner structure manifest across architecture, music, and even crystals.
And most crucially, we established that debilitating states like fear and hatred are not fundamental truths of the cosmos, but constructed errors built upon the misperception of the basic structure of consciousness survival.
And finally, we realized that the stability and consistency we observe in our environment is simply a faithful, continuous mirror of our own characteristic way of constructing those inner psychological blueprints. The world is custom built, moment by moment, by you.
It truly changes how you view everything around you, from the mundane to the magnificent.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the learner. If the consistency of your environment is merely a reflection of your characteristic construction method, what familiar, maybe irritating object in your life today? That perpetually messy drawer, that cracked corner of the pavement you always step on?
The specific style of car you always find yourself driving.
Right. What is a direct symbol of an inner psychological gestalt you built years ago and, through habit, continue to faithfully reproduce?
Think about that symbolic structure the next time you encounter that consistent pattern.
And now, for a delightful psychic palate cleanser to bring us back out of the deep psychological structures of 1964.
The session ended with Seth offering a little psychic postcard, a glimpse of their friend Bill McDonnell, who was away on vacation.
This is always a great moment, grounding the cosmic back into the human. So what was Bill McDonnell up to on his break?
Seth provided surprisingly specific details. He confirmed Bill had gone to Cape Cod and had made 2 friends, both male, one older and one about his own age. Seth saw him near the water, which was expected, but then provided these remarkable specifics. Bill had been at a bar with a large keg, clearly visible.
A keg.
A keg. There are 2 houses nearby, and he was staying in a front room across from a beach. He even saw a boat and a dock.
That is a very precise, unsolicited vacation report.
But the most unusual and guarded detail, the one Jane was hesitant to relay, was that Bill may have been in a group with 4 men, maybe something to do with the string of shells.
A string of shells.
The string of shells. We'll have to wait for Bill's return for verification. But the bar, the beach, the boat, and the highly specific string of shells. It gives us a charming peek into the intersection of psychic reality and everyday life.
A perfect close to a session about the solid structures of non-physical reality.
We really encourage you to study this material deeply. This session, and so many others, came from the incredible resource that is the Seth material. The depth of insight here really cannot be overstated.
Please check out the publisher, New Awareness Network. We strongly encourage you to study the Seth material books and visit their website and bookstore at sethcenter.com/early sessions.
There's truly no better resource for understanding the radical mechanics and true potential of your consciousness. Thank you for taking this profound, deep dive with us today.
Go forth and observe your constructed reality. We'll catch you next time.